What's up, everybody? Welcome to GoJo with Rhule Jr. That is me. With me, as always, a man who I'd imagine somewhere in his home has a sign that says "Gone Fishing." Brandon Newman. Brandon, what's going on?
Not much, Mike. I wish it was fishing season, but it's the fall. So where do bugs go when it gets cold? I've been trying to figure out where the mosquitoes went.
I'd imagine they die. I'd imagine that's probably what
die?
happens. I mean, I don't think the life cycle for those things is all that long.
I mean, especially not around me with my fly swatter. But I just, do you think they just, or if they get behind the lampshade or something like that, but you think they just literally just die out and freeze and then come back like Walt Disney?
No, I think they die, they freeze, and then new ones populate in the spring. Circle of life, man. Circle of life.
I'm gonna do some digging.
There you go. Brandon's going to find out about mosquitoes here. In all seriousness, do you go fishing a lot? Because anyone, download, subscribe, rate, and review GoJo wherever you get your podcast. Leave us a 5-star rating and a review. Charlotte Wilder from Fox Sports joining us on the podcast today.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about her travels during college football season so far. We've also got top 5, bottom 5 in the NFL. A little look back at the discussion in football that continues to nauseate me, coming off a really good Monday night football game between the Raiders and the Chiefs. But
Amen.
Brandon, do you actually go fishing a lot? Because for anyone watching on YouTube, which you can also do on the DraftKings YouTube channel under the GoJo with Rhule Jr. tablet, is going to see Brandon resplendent in a fishing jacket and a Super Bowl hat, which is a great combination.
Thank you, sir. This is the Super Bowl, doesn't matter. Super Bowl 50, Peyton Manning, Cam Newton. But no, Mike, this isn't a fishing vest. I wish it was. I think of it more of a photographer's vest or a director's vest, and I use it for dadding a lot. But it's got little nice pockets. You can put a lot of diapers and keys and things and such in this. But I got it at a Ross, and between Ross, TJ Maxx, and Marshalls, I think Ross is the one that's like more of a treasure hunt. So I feel proud of this find.
I appreciate the Facebook group of dads who vest and the opportunities it affords them here. Speaking of camera people right away, since we're talking about Monday Night Football, how about at the end of that game? So we get a barn burner between the Chiefs and the the Las Vegas Raiders. Chiefs win 30-29 in regulation, and after Davante Adams, the star receiver, who had a freaking night for the Raiders, goes and is seen pushing some sort of employee in the stadium. It looked like he was holding some sort of camera stand or mic stand or something, and the guy gets up from the ground. Davante Adams is walking past him and just straight up shoves him, and boy oh boy, what a really bad ending to a great game, especially for Davante Adams, who I'd now imagine is going to incur a pretty hefty fine when he shows up to his locker on Monday.
Mike, I said, Draymond got people acting different out here. Like,
right.
How do you think that you could be in your Raiders helmet with your number and your name on your back and just fully shove a person that's in normal uniform? It was like the London game all over again. I don't know if you saw the London game, Mike, but people on the sidelines were just like traffic cones getting knocked over left and right. I was like, somebody needs to tell people in London to back away from the field a little bit. But it felt so natural because of all the violence that we've seen from our sports people recently. But I was like, I don't think you can do that win, lose, or draw.
It is pretty amazing because you're right. We always talk about this in sports, how it's wild. You go to a press conference right after a heated, really emotional game and answer these questions and are supposed to be able to put together coherent thoughts. I'm always amazed when athletes, when they get interviewed in the sideline after the game, immediately have these great answers. But you remember there's a reason these people are in these situations. They're special and different. But every once in a while we see the violence butt up against the outer rims of the sport like this, and we go, oh no, like you still definitely can't do that. There's no excuse for the violence of football or frustration in the game that allows you to just push one of the non-padded people in their workplace. Like,
yes.
If that being said, unless that dude was in on it, because now he gets to probably walk into the league office and be like, hey, I got hit at work. You guys are probably going to pay me some money, NFL.
I was going to say, actually, it may be common discourse from the game, because if you remember when the Raiders were leaving the field for halftime, all those Chiefs fans in Arrowhead were throwing beers and stuff at them, and because they were upset about the
roughing the passer call.
Yes, the roughing the passer call, which I'm sure we'll get to. But it seems like it was the fans were a part of the narrative. So for someone just working in the stadium to get pushed over at the end of the game felt like it just kind of closed. Talking about the circle of life, it kind of closed the gap for me.
Yeah, and all things seriously, incredibly lame move by Davante Adams, who's a great player. I don't know anything about him as a person, so I won't comment there, good or bad, but I'll just say incredibly lame move, thing that he should not have done here, thing that he will get pay handsomely for going towards the league office, because man, oh man, you want to talk about the thing you can't have. I have been someone who's often advocated for, at certain points, not full-blown malice in the palace, but a reminder that as a fan, you cannot say and do what you want without impunity. This, by all accounts, unless we hear something different, just appeared to be a guy doing his job in the wrong place and at the wrong time, with a player who was extremely frustrated because the final play of this game was a failed attempt by Derek Carr to go and pass the ball to Davante Adams, where he ends up running into his own man in Hunter Renfrow on a route combination because of the great press coverage of the Kansas City Chiefs that threw off the timing of all that. Guy was pissed off, took it out on the wrong person. Now they're going to take it out of his wallet. I'd imagine and hope that other guy's okay. I don't think it was that serious as far as the severity of the injury, but we'll see. Maybe he puts, I've saw so many people throwing around that Bobby Petrino gif of him, or meme of him with the neck brace on, saying this is how that guy's going to show up to the league office tomorrow, ready to claim his check. But Brandon, let's look at the rest of that game. Wild game. Chiefs fall down 17-0 early on in this game, and it seemed like the entire outcome, one way or another, can be traced back to the roughing the passer penalty that's going to be the topic of conversation all day today. We went from Grady Jarrett and the roughing the passer against Tom Brady that pissed everybody off over the weekend to a roughing the passer involving Chris Jones and Derek Carr. Anyone that missed it, Chris Jones is coming from the backside, beats the offensive line of the Raiders around the right edge. He is coming from Derek Carr's blind side at that point. Carr had turned to the other side of the field. He comes over the top and simultaneously sacks, strips, recovers a fumble in midair, and falls on top of Derek Carr.
Okay, let me say this too. He landed on top of Derek Carr, but something that we mentioned in the broadcast, he tried not to. As fast as everything was going, he still was able to catch himself. He didn't even land on Derek Carr the way that roughing the passer penalties began a few seasons ago.
And that was a point that was pointed out as we look at roughing the passer. One of the things that was pointed out, he tried to brace. He tried to put his arm out and brace on top. The play was not ruled a fumble and a recovery on the field, or else it would have been reviewed. All turnovers inside 2 minutes would have been reviewed, all these things, yada, yada. It was called roughing the passer, and you heard from the rules analyst that came on that said, we are supposed to look for signs of a player trying to brace, trying not to put his full weight on there, and the rules analyst said he believed that if he had seen that should have negated the penalty in that way. As far as the turnover on that, or the fact that the ball was even up in the air and loose, the rules, they were asked about it after the game, the officiating crew, and the rules do point out that for a quarterback, when you are in the pocket with your feet set, you are afforded protections as a defenseless player and as the quarterback in that situation that extend even if the ball is loose on the ground. So if that ball were loose in a fumble and you fell on him in that way, it still could potentially lead to roughing the passer in that situation. So that's just the way it shakes out. It's unfortunate. It's bad. It's a play and a judgment that the official cannot make, in my opinion, in that setting. It shouldn't lead to, on the other side of this, reviewing every roughing the passer penalty or reviewing penalties like that in general, because that's a can of worms that we do not want to open as far as the length and time of these games. They've done a good job of trimming those down. If you go into reviewing every penalty like that, we're going to be here longer than college football games. And I promise none of you want that.
I don't know, Mike. I think Chris Jones brings up a really good point. He got interviewed after the game and said, if protecting the cornerbacks is an important part of the game, then every roughing the passing penalty should be up to review. And I kind of agree. Obviously, as a defensive lineman, and being able to watch this specific week 5 of the 2022 NFL season, we got plenty of options to choose from as to why we need to review these things, because the refs ain't getting it right, and that often means that the defensive side of the ball obviously gets the short end of the stick, Mike, but now it feels like they just want defenders to be extras in a movie. And even worse than extras in a movie, they want defenders on the NFL field to be extras in a football movie, which is like literally just bodies in the way of touchdowns.
Yeah, listen, I agree. It's been an unfair environment for defenders for a while. I'm just saying that It'd be nice if you could siphon it off to just quarterbacks. I don't feel like because then you have the slippery slope of other players who are looking around and saying, all right, well, is my plight as someone who is on the perimeter trying to cover these great receivers who is constantly victimized at the hands of holding, illegal use of hands penalties, all these things that can also affect the body of a game in a critical moment, maybe like we saw at the end last night where guys don't run into each other, but there's contact there. And now all of a sudden you're saying, well, it's the last play of the game. It's the most important play of the game. Why wouldn't we review that there? I understand Chris Jones' plight. Officials need to get better at calling it. We've seen that happen in college with the targeting penalties where officials have gotten better at calling those things, and officials have gotten better at seeing that in real time. And we see examples all the time of officials doing a great job seeing things the rest of us couldn't comprehend in real time. But they do have to make a decision, because one of the things that we talk about going into every season is points of emphasis around the league. What is the rule that they are told going into the year by the league office we are trying to minimize or trying to make heightened awareness of going into the year? And for so long it has been protecting the quarterback. At some point that pendulum's going to have to swing back a little bit, or you're going to start to turn too many people off. I get it. Always good business to keep the quarterbacks on the field. Always good business to make sure that position is safe. Period. End of sentence. And if you're going to err on one side, you err on that side if you're a league, because over a long period of time, that's going to prove to be a good decision for you. The problem in this game, Brandon, so it was a ridiculous, laughable call. There's very few things to say today other than that was bad. Everyone looked at that and said bad. The problem is it also ended up bad for the Raiders, because it just did the one thing you don't want to do. It pissed off Pat Mahomes, because from that point on, that Chiefs offense was on the warpath. And the funniest part even is there's a bunch of football reasons why this turned around for the Chiefs, who were getting victimized by Chandler Jones and Max Crosby in the first half, who were getting victimized by Devontae Adams in the first half of this game. And they started in the second quarter and the second half helping out their tackles more in pass protection, committing to running the ball a little bit more that takes the edge off of some of those players here. Defensively for the Chiefs, they had to sit in two high safeties all night, and so we saw that Raiders run game gouge them on defense, but they said at some point we've got to live with something, because especially in the first half when Frank Clark wasn't on the field, you only had so much available to you personnel-wise. But the real swing state was, Brandon, after Andy Reid and that Chiefs home crowd let those officials have it, those men were terrified to throw a flag anywhere in the vicinity of the Kansas City Chiefs. I know in the second half, at least in the third quarter, there were already in the first, I think, 8 or 9 minutes, or sort of like 12 minutes of that third quarter, 6 penalties called on the Raiders. After that point, you heard one of the officials get on the mic. There was a punt return by the Chiefs where there was originally a block in the back, and the official picked up the flag for the block in the back, and his voice cracking like that man was on the verge of tears, saying, "There's no foul for blocking the back on the play." I said, oh, these guys are just trying to get home safe. These guys don't want the problems that come with the rest of this. And I truly think there was a whole lot of makeup call in some of the things that went down in the second half, just the sheer volume of penalties against the Las Vegas Raiders. And so it was between angering a team that when motivated, we've seen that with the Chiefs, sometimes they can get caught playing with their food, sometimes they can walk in and not be motivated. When you laser lock their focus, they'll go out there and make you bite the curve. Like, they'll go out there and kick the ever-loving shit out of you.
Yes, but I think how they do it is very different now, Mike. Like, we've talked about the absence of Tyreek Hill. This game was really good sample size of what Patrick Mahomes can do to get down the field. And then Travis Kelce's night, 7 catches for 25 yards and 4 touchdowns, is proof that all you got to do is get into the vicinity.
Yeah, and the Chiefs have been a great red zone team this season, in large part because they found creative ways to do it. Kelce had a throwback night. He's looked incredible. He's looked really fluid. I saw Dan Orlovsky and others commenting that it looks like that dude's aged backwards this season compared with what we've seen in recent years. He looks really good, looks really healthy. So all of that ends up getting us to the last point of this, which is the exhausting and mind-numbing conversation around decision-making in key situations in the NFL. Raiders down the stretch of this game had a chance to tie the game. It was 29-30, and they had the decision and made the decision to go for 2 in that situation instead of kicking the field goal, tying that game. And Brandon, everyone's going to spend the day going through and talking about analytics. I saw people already losing their minds on the timeline, having these big, broad level discussions about analytics there, which if you want to do, that's fine. And if we want to do it here, I'm happy to do it and explain why I think that decision's not the worst decision in the world, based just purely on football reasons, about being an aggressive football person making these decisions when you're Josh McDaniels on a team that's now 1-4 and was 1-3 going into this and already on life support. ESPN has like their data and analytics model that they, Seth Walder and the folks over in that department who do a great job will put out. Their analytics model had this decision as a coin flip. So the analytics people, and I don't know what the Vegas Raiders policy on that is. I don't know what their analytics department would have said. But if we're going off what we have available as far as the public and the case, the broadcast crew here, the model would have been a coin flip, slightly in favor of going for 2, but only slightly. And Seth Walder, who is part of ESPN's analytics department, said and tweeted during the game, if it was me, I probably would have kicked the extra point. And saying, reasons about not incentivizing the Chiefs to go out if you make the 2-point conversion to be aggressive, all of these very like football game theory things. The ESPN model had it as a coin flip. Josh McDaniels made a decision because he saw in this game, we're not stopping this buzzsaw that is the Chiefs offense at this point. We're probably better off trying to go win this now, because if you go for 2 there and you get it 1, you're winning, which is great. And if you go for 2 there and miss it, you have a Chiefs offense that is less incentivized to go out there and be aggressive like they weren't on that next drive. And then you end up getting the ball back in your hands with plenty of time, no timeouts, but plenty of time, and a chance to go win that game with a drive, which is all you're playing for in overtime anyway. You kick the field goal, yeah, the Chiefs probably won't be as aggressive. There's certainly a middle ground there. And then if you end up missing it there, you get what you got in this case versus, if you make it, yeah, now the Chiefs are going to go down there. Now the Chiefs are going forward on 4th down. Now the Chiefs are in that mode to go win the game. And there's, a give and take to that. But if they're up 1 at that point and they're winning the game, I'd have to imagine most football people are like, hell yeah, because it's just results business for a lot of people. So I get all that discussion is going to happen. I just want to point out, analytics did not tell Josh McDaniel to do this. Analytics in most places I saw said, hey, this is a coin flip, do what you want. And Josh McDaniels did what he wanted.
I feel like I'm not questioning the decision. I'm questioning the decision to run the ball in that moment, Mike, because I think Josh Jacobs was doing a great job. He was doing really well. He earlier in that game in the first half, he had scored, and they thought they can do that again. But the difference was the Chiefs were actually in a goal line defense the second time around, and Chris Jones was already pissed off from the getting an actual money taken out of his pocket. Mike, we're not going to talk about the roughing passer play anymore, but a strip sack, a fumble recovery, those are all superstar coins for defensive tackles, right? He got that taken away from him, so he made this huge goal line stand. I thought it was a mistake for Josh McDaniels to choose a running play in that moment, because it really eliminates a lot of options to score.
Yeah, you know what? I would have agreed with that if it weren't for the rest of the game, where they had just been running the ball whenever they wanted to. And I get the math changes down on the goal line, but your offensive line had been getting legitimately good movement. And we're talking about a running back that ended up being inches short. I mean, they got to review that play. It was just one of those where the Chiefs ended up making a better play. But again, to the point that, and I don't want to belabor the analytics point too much, because, man, I think this discussion has become so much of just people wanting to go out here and not let another group of people be right or influence the way they look at the sport here. It's just trying to help people make better decisions. And in this case, why is being aggressive always I understand jobs are on the line. I understand people look at this and say, all of us in the media don't have skin in the game. We're telling these people to do that. The people inside the building who work in the analytics department have skin in the game. I'd imagine their jobs and livelihood are pretty tied to what goes on with the regime that's currently in the organization and how they feel about making use of your information. And it's trying to do that and then putting it in the hands of the coach. And a coach trying to make the decision, all right, do we just want to wait longer to lose, or do we want to go out and try and win? We see this, it's like the prevent defense conversation boiled down into an ideology. Do I want to sit back here and just make losing happen quicker or slower, or do I want to go out here and actually try and do the things my team is good at and put us in a position to win right now against what you could reason very football brainy and say is a Chiefs offense you just aren't stopping when they are motivated right right now. You just aren't stopping when they are going full foot down on the pedal and pushing the gas all the way here. That's the thing that always blows me away, is being aggressive and trying to win seem like a bad thing, and just waiting around and finding honor in losing in overtime instead of losing in regulation in the same situation you would have been playing for in overtime. If you had given the Raiders the ball in overtime, driving with a chance to win, and they had ultimately fallen short, everyone would have said, well, what can you do? Versus you had the ball at the end of regulation, driving with a chance to win it, down 1, just needing to kick a field goal, and now everyone's going to say, what the hell is wrong with you? You got to the same situation, you just got there 15 minutes sooner. So I'll never understand a lot of the hand-wringing that goes on with that, but it's a war where everyone is very firmly entrenched in their camp right now and very rarely wants to hear the other side of things. And I know I tend to sound like I skew on the analytics side of things, but I also just like aggressive football. I like letting it be won by the players and the lines, and usually not kickers and the things that end up going along with this. So, what do you do?
I think, like you said, it's to help people make better decisions on the football field, but I think it's, at the end of the day, a way to kind of understand the narrative around the football game, right? Because ESPN Stats and Info put this out, and I hate that the Ravens are in this as well, but the Raiders are the 5th team in NFL history to lose twice after holding at least a 17-point lead within the first 5 games of the season. They joined this year's Ravens, the 2020 Chargers, the 2011 Vikings, and the 1993 Jets. Now, obviously, those more recent ones, even with Chargers and the Ravens, we remember all of those decisions, and the reason that they were at this point, obviously the defense falling apart, but it was a lot of those 2-point conversion, 4th down plays for the Ravens and the Chargers that led to losing this deficit and trying to be aggressive.
Well, yeah, and I understand that, but it also flies in the face of what football people usually throw out, which is, well, you never lose on any one play. Like, a coach makes a bad call or a player makes a bad play,
True.
And everyone who's been around the sport forever goes, well, there's a million other plays in the game. We just lionized Justin Pugh for walking into a press conference and defending his kicker for being in that moment here. Analytics is an easy person to blame that's not in the locker room with you on a day in and day out basis. And at convenient junctures, it feels like that's what everyone falls back on here, which is we can blame the analytics boogie monster and not have to hold a coach accountable or not hold the players and the team accountable for giving up a 17-point lead in the first place. The Raiders didn't lose that game because of analytics. They lost that game because the Chiefs offense came out and kicked the shit out of them after erasing a 17-point deficit. That's why you lost the game. I'm not saying
Chiefs analytics.
I'm not saying the Raiders, are even at fault. I'm saying for the people that are going to sit around and talk about this all morning, like, I thought we win and lose the game on a variety of different plays over the day and not just one or two. I even am someone that puts stock in the fact that some more moments are more important than others, but it is what it is at this point. So that's very exciting Monday Night Football game that unfortunately will be talked about only in terms of a catastrophic penalty, a player shoving an employee, and 4th down decision making or 2-point conversion decision making. Brandon, we will get to top 5, bottom 5 here in just a second, but I want to tell you about good decisions that you can make here on this show and in your life with our friends at Game Time. New friends, new supporters of the show. Make sure you go check them out with the Game Time app. It is one of the fastest growing, no, scratch that, forget one of. It is the fastest growing ticket app in the biz right now. With football season in full swing, with concert season still going on right now, great games every weekend. You can get closer to the action thanks to the folks at Game Time. It is super easy to use and go be a part of. And who would want to be? That Chiefs crowd. I said last night, Brandon, if you had Arrowhead versus God was getting points last night. Because that crowd was absolutely insane and influenced the outcome of that game through fear tactics with these referees. It was so palpable in there. Arrowhead versus God +7. If you want to be a part of that winning effort on the crowd side here, Game Time's going to help you. It's super easy. The interface is awesome. Gives you a great look at what events are available in your area. It's always going to be the cheapest possible option. You can get tickets. I was talking yesterday. Harry Styles played in Chicago at the United Center last night. There were tickets for like $166 on Game Time to go see Harry bleeping Styles. Don't Worry Darling Drama's very own Harry Styles in the flesh for that low cost here. It's so easy to get them last minute. I could have bought tickets for that and driven up from here last night. I have a young nephew that I'm going to get baptized today, so can't really do that, have responsibilities.
Amen.
I'm an adult, but if I didn't have those responsibilities, like when I get back home in LA, be out here balling on the Game Time app. It is the fastest growing ticket app. It guarantees the lowest price on tickets to all your favorite sporting events, concerts, shows. You can view it right. You can view your seat and what your view would look like right in the app, and checkout takes less than 30 seconds. So download the Game Time app. Use and redeem promo code GOJO and add 20% off your first purchase. Again, that's GOJO for $20, not 20%. Download the Game Time app, create an account, code GOJO, $20 off your first purchase. Again, GOJO, $20 off your first purchase. Cash. Terms apply. Download Game Time. Last minute tickets. Lowest price guaranteed. Brandon, let's get to top 5, bottom 5 now that we can assess the whole NFL weekend that was. For anyone that's new around here, we do the top 5, bottom 5, anything that happened over the NFL weekend that we can weave into this. Brandon and I alternate who has the top and bottom 5. Brandon is this week's top 5 winner. We alternate and do 5-5, 4-4, 3-3, 2-2, 1-1. Because that's the order that we liked when someone suggested it to us one time. So, Brandon, since you are on top, you can kick this thing off. Top 5 things from the NFL weekend that was. What do we got?
Okay, well, I'm going to start off with Monday Night Football and the historic night that Travis Kelce had. All right, Travis Kelce, he did a lot of things. 4 different touchdown catches. Kelce became the first player with 4 receiving touchdowns, all fewer than 10 yards in NFL history, and he did it all on his mother's birthday, Mike.
Saw that. I think it was his birthday and his mother's birthday, which is awesome.
His birthday was on the 5th. They kind of gave it to that because it was in the season of things. But as someone whose both of my parents' birthdays are in this week of October, I felt that. I thought that was cool.
Going out and showing out there for moms, always a good decision. You love to see that. Efficiency monster, fantasy monster last night. Travis Kelce, true baller. That stiff arm touchdown where he stiff armed 4 dudes on the way to the end zone. Real built different moment for Kels there. Brandon, bottom 5, number 5 for me, Ron Rivera's quote. Did you see this talking about Carson Wentz and their situation? So Ron Rivera was sitting at a press conference and he was asked why he thinks the rest of the division, the NFC East, is making progress where the Commanders aren't. His response was one word: quarterback. When he was asked a follow-up question that focused specifically on the Cowboys, who have been winning these games without Dak Prescott, he said, quote, "They started with Dak, they build around Dak, and the offense is built around Dak. Their backup's a guy that's very solid inside what they do, and the truth is this is a quarterback-driven league. If you look at the teams that have been able to sustain success, they've been able to build it around a specific quarterback." Now, he was asked further about, they chose Carson Wentz. Do you regret that? He said no. He said, there's plenty of things Carson's done good this season and some games where it hasn't been so great. Brandon, I'm stunned because Ron Rivera is generally seen as a guy that's one of the better leaders in the NFL. That was, a man that was lauded for that during his time in Carolina. He's been asked to be one of the adults in the room along with Jason Wright in an organization rife with controversy in the Washington football team, Commanders, whatever you want to call them at this point. And this is decidedly not that. Like, I don't know what happens with Carson Wentz inside of buildings that makes people feel like they can talk this bold in public, but this, to me, flies in the face of everything that would be considered good leadership. And I have a lot of respect for Ron Rivera, but in this moment, to boil it down to that as you're in the midst of some losing, even if it's true, looking around at the rest of this division and saying that, for Jalen Hurts, who we've constantly asked questions about his job, the Cowboys, who are on their backup quarterback right now, and as much as Ron's right in the reasoning there, the backup's still the one throwing the football, and the New York Giants, whose quarterback Daniel Jones, we don't even know if he's going to be there next year, and was playing on a bum ankle this past weekend. At some point, and I'm sure Ron Rivera's taken it in others, it's usually a good idea in those settings to lead with me and praise the we. Like, that's just generally a good rule of thumb when it comes to responsibility in public.
He usually does do that, Mike, but you're right about Carson Wentz. There's something there. And maybe it is that everyone gets coached up a little different, right? Like maybe Carson Wentz in his one-on-ones with his coaches, he's like, listen, guys, like to get me going, I need you to shit on me in the media. Like, I really need you to just go out there and just talk about me behind my back like I'm trash.
I think
if there's
based on what we've seen in public with Carson Wentz and the end of his tenure in Philadelphia, I very much doubt that's true.
You doubt that's true?
Yes.
I feel like
so much of Carson
okay.
Wentz's tenure in Philadelphia seemed to be about a new coaching staff coming in and Carson Wentz not really, vibing with the way that he was talked about here. A guy who, I do not get the vibe that Carson Wentz enjoys what happened here. And Alex Smith, who was a quarterback who was in that organization with this team, came out and was very public saying these comments bothered him a lot. And I think just in general, like, I understand we all want honest answers from coaches, but at the same time, I think you have a responsibility as the leader of your team and as the head coach to kind of have a buck stops with me mentality, especially in public. And we talked about it. You lose for a lot of reasons. We've seen Carson Wentz throw for a whole bunch of yards in these games. There are plenty of flaws to go around for the Washington Commanders. And I just thought this wasn't it. For a guy that's usually it, this wasn't it from Ron Rivera. So that is number 5 in the bottom 5 for me.
Okay. I'll take that Carson Wentz news and use it as a through line because I feel like Derek Carr is a couple throws away from being mentioned in the same breath as Carson Wentz. But I thought this was special, Mike. Coming in number 4 on my top 5 NFL is in the first quarter of Monday Night Football. Yes, I'm still talking about Monday Night Football. Derek Carr connected with his former teammate Devontae Adams for a 58-yard touchdown pass. Pass was the second longest touchdown reception for Adams in his career. But more importantly, and the reason I'm talking about it now, it's the 200th touchdown for Derek Carr in his career. Obviously, the Raiders still lost to the Chiefs 30-29. Raiders are 1-4 on the season. But talking about being impressed by things, Mike, I was impressed by Derek Carr in his post-game press conference, starting with me, praising the we, doing exactly what you're talking about. He always has that kind of head coach speech. But I thought it was special, the fact that that big play that we saw in the first quarter actually was special to both Devontae Adams and Derek Carr.
Yep, the former college teammates. You had the cool moment, Devontae Adams too, throwing up the hand as he pulling the Randy Moss move where he threw up the hand right as he realized I got space in these guys that are trying to double cover me. It was a baller move. And again, night didn't end great for Devontae Adams, but man, he was cooking in the middle of that. You saw, as you pointed out, the value of a true number 1 going out there. We saw the removal of that in Green Bay and the effect it has, and you see the effect it has here in Las Vegas. That was a rip by Derek Carr of a throw. Brandon, I'll stick with quarterbacks in that in the general West divisions here and go to the NFC West. Kyler Murray and the Cardinals for not realizing they hadn't gotten the first down. Late in the fourth quarter, no timeouts. Kyler Murray scrambled out of the pocket, ran for 9.5 and decided to slide, and the Cardinals ended up being short. It was 3rd and 1, but he rushed to the line of scrimmage, spiked the ball with 22 seconds left, not realizing that it was bringing up 4th down, so they had to go out there and attempt that field goal that Matt Amendola missed in this game. And I heard a couple of people rightly point this out. The Cardinals sideline and the Cardinals coaching staff also deserve blame for not having that situation handled and readily realizing that, as does Kyler Murray, who is a highly paid player out there at an important position that requires you to know. And for a guy that's always going to have that, film study clause in the background of the discussion for everything, this is one of those moments. I get it's difficult in real time. You're paid to know and be aware, as are the coaches. Hey, we didn't get the first down on that. We don't have a down to burn. We can't go up here and just spike the ball in that way and get rid of it. Kyler's got to dive for that first down. It's got to be something where you can't leave it up to a slide in a critical moment like that. You've got to get through and you've got to get that play made. But a failure all around and something that went into, as Justin Pugh pointed out, one of the many moments that ended up costing the Cardinals that game.
Doesn't it seem like Kyler Murray and Cliff Kingsbury don't talk even during the game? That's what to your point of, or whoever's point, that the sideline deserves some blame too. During that moment, you look at Cliff Kingsbury and he's like, what the F are we doing out there? Like, come on, guys. It's like, what are you doing? What were you focused on?
It just goes back to what we talked about during the preseason. At times it seems like you had these two forces at odds based on all of the stuff that was going on there, based on a lot of the conversations in the public, where you had an organization that felt like it was at odds with Kyler Murray with all the stuff about that contract that got leaked. But this is game day functionality just not working out here. What do we got at number 3 on the top 5, Brandon?
You know what? I'm gonna go with I'm gonna flip my 2 and 3 real quick, just because I want to save the quarterbacks for the end. But close games in the NFL, Mike. This came out before the Ravens game on Sunday Night Football and the Chiefs game on Monday Night Football. So these both categorize as close games as well. But with 2 games yet to be completed in Week 5, I just mentioned those, there are 47 games this season decided by 8 or fewer points in 60 games that have been played with 1 score in the fourth quarter. We talked about this last week. There have been 37 games this season decided by 6 or fewer points. And there have been 26 games decided by 3 or fewer points. That's the second most games through the first 5 weeks of the NFL season, behind 1999. So it's been some good football. As much as we've been talking about the bad Thursday night football game between the Colts and the Broncos, it still has been some close football games, so they're all interesting.
It has been. It's been a really hot start to the season. We've seen a lot of these 1 o'clock windows jam-packed with it. It's been an absolute blast. Like you pointed out, razor-thin margins, which is pro football. It's the biggest difference between college and pro is the razor-thin margins here. Number 3 in the bottom 5, Brandon, quick because we already did it. Analytics discourse around pro football. It's so toxic. It's devoid of anything that involves listening or learning. It's exactly what analytics and decision science aren't supposed to be, and it sucks. So the bottom 5, analytics discourse around pro football.
Makes a lot of sense here. Makes a lot of sense. My number 2, Buffalo quarterback Josh Allen passed for 424 yards and 4 touchdowns in the Bills' victory over the Pittsburgh Steelers, 38-3. It marked Allen's 8th career game with at least 4 touchdown passes, tying Andrew Luck with 8 games. Allen has 150 combined passing and rushing touchdowns, 117 passing, 33 rushing. Josh Allen, dual threat quarterback.
Some would say the best dual threat quarterback in the NFL, but we don't got to go there. Total space alien. Total space alien. Number 2, on the bottom 5, Brandon, you'll see where I'm going with this. Grady Jarrett's roughing the passer penalty against Tom Brady over the weekend. What's understood need not be explained.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, hey, you ain't lying. And yes, I do know where you're going. But my number 1, Jalen Hurts, Philadelphia quarterback, 300 yards. Or 300 total yards, 239 passing, 61 rushing, 2 rushing touchdowns, as we talked about in their win over Arizona. The Eagles are 5-0 for the first time since 2004 back in the day. And when they were 5-0 back in the day, they ended up in the Super Bowl. As you remember, I believe Andy Reid was there. But Hurts has 19 rushing touchdowns in his first 24 career starts, surpassing Cam Newton's 18 rushing touchdowns. For the most rushing touchdowns all time by a quarterback in his first 25 starts. So Jalen Hurts, congratulations, number 1 in my top 5.
One of the quarterbacks that's got Ron Rivera out here pressed in public talking about Carson Wentz. Number 1, Brandon, for me, Chris Jones roughing the passer penalty here. Those 2 get to sit at the top of the heap. It's a weekend defined by those. It's going to be interesting to see how the league responds as they are simultaneously trying to protect quarterbacks from themselves and injuries on the Tua Tagovailoa front. I don't think those things are overly related, by the way. I think it's pretty easy to look at and say, hey, spotting concussion symptoms and being very, 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 very careful about them is very important. And protecting quarterbacks in the pocket during the normal course of action is something we've seen a part of the game for a while, and officials need to be better at calling, especially in situations like this. So that is top 5, bottom 5 from the NFL's weekend that was. We are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we are going to visit a little bit of college football from the weekend with our good friend and Fox Sports' very own Charlotte Wilder. So delighted to have back with us our favorite and yours, Fox Sports' very own writer, college football reporter, and world traveler, Charlotte Wilder, back with us on the program. Charlotte, what's going on?
Michael, always an absolute joy to join you. I'm back in Brooklyn where I live for a few days, back from Athens, Georgia, about to head to Ann Arbor, Michigan. So you caught me at a good time.
Oh, man, you get to head to the big house this week. All right, so for anyone that's unaware, Charlotte, who has been with us before on this show, as part of her job with Fox, gets to go around the country to various college sports towns, stadiums, all these venues. Had a great tour last year that she was a part of, but you're getting to go to some of the biggest and best venues that college football has brought. So just as a catch-up, where have you been already this season? You're about halfway through the tour right now, correct?
Yes, exactly halfway. So it's called the Ultimate College Football Road Trip. It's sponsored by Dos Equis, and we go. It's been, it's sort of amazing the way it's worked out this year because we planned the schedule ahead of time. And this year it's ended up being like some of the biggest games each week, given, because you can guess, but you never know, like, if one school's going to have a massive come apart, in like week 2. And by the time you get there,
Listen, Charlotte, we just saw an unranked Texas versus Oklahoma where Oklahoma got the dog walked on them in the Red River game. So totally understand. This is maybe the most unpredictable sport we have.
Exactly, which is why we love it so much. It's, the more chaos, the better, is my feeling when it comes to any sport. So, so far, so we started we were in Atlanta for the Georgia-Oregon game at the neutral site, the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And then it's too early in the season for me to be forgetting where I went.
I disagree. I think this is the perfect point in the season for like players, media members, coaches, everyone, where your brain is just dumping. So I don't know how you are. When I call games, as soon as I get done, I've done interviews after games where people have asked me about what's going on, and I will forget players I was just talking about hours ago because my brain just purges all the information and then makes room for the next 2 teams the next week.
Yes, you're so locked in as it's happening, and then the minute it's over, you're like, okay, well, I used to make fun of Belichick when he was like, we're on to Cincinnati, but now I'm like, no, we're on to Cincinnati, like, I get it. But no, so then we went to Austin for Texas Bama, which was a wild experience, which I'll tell you about. Then we went to oh my God, this is really, I can't believe this is happening. We were to Tennessee for Tennessee, Florida, which was incredible. And then Athens for the oldest rivalry in the South, Georgia, Auburn.
Man, all right, so a lot of heavy hitters there, a lot of wild fan bases. You mentioned the Texas game, though. One of the games of the year so far, Alabama, Texas, really a big-time Texas is back moment. We felt for a lot of people, obviously, the injury to Quinn Ewers sort of went a little different there. But What was that like? I saw a lot of, we get a lot of Matthew McConaughey references, all these things that pop up there. How'd Austin treat you?
Austin, I think Texas, to me, this is my second time at a game there, and I'm always struck by how much I like it, which is sort of a silly thing to say because there are only a handful of places in sports that I've been like, not for me. But Austin itself is such a cool place, and I think what sometimes doesn't get given enough credit is how different UT still feels from Austin. Like, people say, recruits, people will be like, oh, you don't get the best kids because, these are kids who just want to go to Austin. Like, they're not actually there for football. They're there because it's a cool city. But, like, UT has its own culture that feels very separate from Austin in a way, where it's like, sure, there's a lot of overlap and they're totally entwined, but when you're at a college football game, as opposed to being on like the east side of Austin at a cool bar, like those feel very different still. And the game itself the atmosphere was one of the coolest I've ever experienced. There's such a sense of anticipation. Before, Quinn got hurt, it was like electric. Everyone was on the side, Katie was on the sidelines. I can't even begin to list like the number of famous people. Jordan Spieth is like standing next to me. Like, it was just such a huge moment for them, and the injury was just such a huge bummer. But the fact that they still almost pulled it off was sort of incredible.
How weird was the interaction with Kevin Durant? Because that was still, I think, at the height of a lot of the drama around that team. I don't think we had gotten media days and stuff for the Nets at that point.
No, he was. So whenever we do these things, I need to shout out my producer from last year, Kristen Hurley, who's now at Omaha Productions, because we would be at games and she would put her phone in my hand with the video in selfie mode on record, give it to me and be like, go get him. Like, Eli Manning's on the sideline at Ole Miss. She's like, go get a video with him. And it was such a great, I sort of try to channel that, when I'm at these things, because it's like, this is your moment and you can't be embarrassed. You can't chicken out. You can't be like, oh, I don't know. Like, if Kevin Durant's on the sideline at a Texas game, he wants to be seen. So it's like, now's your chance. And so, I think I took that boldness, and I've gotten a little bit better at being less weirded out myself about it. And I just went up to him and I was like, can we do a hook 'em? KD, how you doing? He was like, yeah, sure, great. And like, I don't know if you found this, Mike, but if you get athletes at something that's either not their sport or a place that they love, that's all they want to talk about. That's all they want to celebrate. So he was actually like very cool and seemed to be having a good time. I wanted to be like, so what's the deal with the Nets? But I was
going to say, I feel like honestly at that point, if you weren't talking about Kyrie Irving, if you weren't talking about Kevin Durant's supposed reported threats about who he wanted in or out of the front office and coaching staff, he was probably game to talk about any of that at that point. You were manna from heaven for that dude.
Yes, exactly. If you're someone who is not going up to him and being like, so, are you going to get swept by the Celtics again? He was probably thrilled.
No, absolutely. And great hook him there with his really long fingers kind of terrified me. He's too big. He's
a spider, man. He is a string bean. He's so long. Like, some people are tall, but Kevin Durant's like long.
Yeah, you can't. Describing him as tall is wholly inaccurate and sells it short. How was like your feel of Texas fans? Because I feel like as we look around college football and get to interact, like one of the coolest parts of the job is getting to interact with different fan bases, find out their things. It's why I enjoy eating my way. I've got the running list in my phone of every restaurant recommendation for every college town that I've been in so far, because you kind of get to learn everyone's stuff. But with Texas fans, so much of the rest of the world just looks at them as a meme, and the Texas is back-o-meter and how we think they perceive their program. When you got to be around there and talk to people, talk to alums and stuff like that, what sense did you get for how Texas fans currently view themselves and their program?
I think Texas fans are always going to be a little bit, there's a lot of we're better than you vibes. Yeah. But I also really respect it because, like, sports-wise, they're not. So I think that there's something really admirable about, like, I went to a bar before and we do this activation at a bar and, I interview fans and they're like, Texas is obviously back. We've actually never not been back. And Arch Manning chose us over Alabama because we are the greatest school in the world. Look around this city. What does Tuscaloosa have? Like, talking so much trash for a fan base that hasn't been good in, I don't know, 2006? Is that the?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Realistically, probably I guess. You obviously have like the Vince Young game. Everyone remembers that game against USC.
Yes.
You've got like Colt McCoy after that getting knocked out of the championship game against Bama. Those teams and stuff like that. But it's been a long time. It's been since probably before like we would have gotten to college.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Like 06-ish. And the fact that they're still, I think because Austin's such a cool place, because UT is such a brand, because there's so much money there, I think a lot of these people, the fans, like really channel that and are like, sure, maybe we lose, but technically, like, we're better than you in all of the other ways we could be better than you. So what's a score, really? But they're somehow also not like obnoxious about it. I think they're so earnest and mean it so truly that it's hard to be. It's almost like I'm standing there being like, bless your heart.
Yes. Well, and listen, it's the old like George Costanza, it's not a lie if you believe it. And listen, as a Notre Dame fan who has felt similarly and seen us perceive ourselves in a certain way at times, I can understand where that comes from, being one of the college football blue bloods. It's nice to see that they haven't lost that shine, that the weight of what's happened recently hasn't gotten to them, and that there is still a lot of love in their blessed hearts for the Longhorns.
It's also, I think hook 'em. I think that hand gesture and the burnt orange and the logo and the mascot Bevo, I think all of that is among the coolest in college football. Like, when you're there and you're like hook 'em and you're doing that hand thing, I feel so cool. It's like, in and of itself, such a vibe that, of course, it's going to go to their
thing that
head.
happened to Texas was when the Big 12 tried to ban the horns down and make that a penalty, though, because it took you're right, like getting to walk around and just chuck up a horns up, inherently cool. But once you made this the official sign of the bad boy, and for those not watching on YouTube right now, chucking up the horns down, once that got outlawed in a way, it became the coolest thing that you could possibly do. And I feel like that really, because that wasn't, I mean, I don't know if, I never got the impression that that was a Texas thing as much as it was a, like, for some reason, the Big 12 felt like they needed to outlaw anything in the way of fun. And because Texas is one of the big brands, and because they'd struggled, when you get teams coming in there sawing off the horns, and then you go and tell any young person you can't do this, we all gravitate towards it. And then Texas catches the stray from that because they're technically at the center of it. It's like when your mom or dad brings you back somewhere after you got in a fight and they try and make the other kids apologize to you. And it's like, no, just let me handle this, because now the next time I come back, I'm the kid whose mom and dad came into school and had to try and fight their battle for him. And that doesn't look good for anybody.
I couldn't have said it better, Mike. That's so true. And it's also it really makes them look like pansies.
Yeah.
And I think that there's no world in which that should be a penalty. But I also think that in the case of Texas fans, part of the problem is that instead of going back and being embarrassed that mom and dad got involved, they're like, yeah, you heard my mom and dad. They said you can't do horns down, so don't do horns down.
My dad's a lawyer.
Yeah, they really ran. Yeah, exactly. They were like, pretty sure you can't do. Like, they feel it. Sometimes I get the sense that they're glad that the Big 12 banned it. So I think that, but I feel like I sound like I'm talking badly about Texas, and I truly love it there. Like, I think being on the sidelines at their games is so cool. Also, so hot.
Yes.
Oh my God. I don't know how, like, honestly, Mike, how do people play? You played football. How do you play football when it's that hot? Because I was standing there chugging water in a tank top and shorts without football pads and a helmet on, and I thought I was going to die.
DKR is so interesting because I don't think people associate it with that.
And it's turf.
I remember so vividly watching the LSU game from Joe Burrow's 2019 championship season when they played down there very early in the year. It was a game that was about 1,000 to 1,000. It was all offense, but it was also about 1,000 degrees on the field, and that game went well into the night, and you still had guys dealing with that. And it's also like Texas heat's so different. Like the hottest environment I remember feeling and noticing was when we were getting ready to practice for the championship game down in Miami. It was being played at the Orange Bowl.
Yeah.
And it was January in Miami. And we were practicing at the Dolphins facility while we were down there. And the first day we walked outside, it felt like someone had just covered my pads in wool. And it was oppressive. And I'm like, this is January. No wonder everyone in Florida is so fast and in such great shape, because if you're doing this in July and August, you're made of different material than I am. It's just not the same.
Yeah, I truly, I guess it's, they do heat training and stuff, but it was like out of control. I put my hand over the turf and it's just like heat's just radiating.
One of the most depressing feelings on earth is walking out to practice during training camp and looking out on the turf field, and when you can see the air doing the little wavy thing where you look and see the heat above the field, and I'm about to go out there and melt my cleats on that. That's not cute. It's not cute for anyone.
And when you can see it on TV, it's worse because you're like, oh well, I don't know how they're doing. But yeah, no, Texas Bam was great. It was a huge bummer that Quinn got hurt because he doesn't get hurt. I think that game's entirely different. Like the momentum they had. Here, I have a question for you, Mike. Do you believe in momentum in sports?
So no. Like, I believe that there are teams that are mature enough to handle swings, and then there are teams that are learning how to do that. Like, if you're a good team that can weather a lot of moment, you're always so, like, I always told people when I was finally on like good teams at the end of my college career, the biggest difference was you were never watching when your unit was on the field. So when we were on defense, our offense and our offensive line would be over in our own separate area. We'd be looking at our stuff, and you were only paying attention to find out if it was third down or not, because then the punt team was getting ready and you had to get ready as an offense to get up. Other than that, we didn't pay attention to what anyone else did, because you got to kind of silo yourself off. What they're doing doesn't matter. The drive before doesn't matter. You got one job every time you take the field. If it's the defense, it's to stop them. And if it's the offense, it's to score. And so to that extent, like, momentum's not real in that extent, because your job doesn't change every time you go out there. As cliche as that sounds, when you're actually operating the way that the teams at the top of college football do, you're kind of, I won't say resistant to that, because we're all human beings. When you get an environment like that, you can feel that. It makes communication harder on field. There are inherent differences that come in that way, but it's not all of a sudden like, well, the pendulum swung your guys' way. It's just, well, either a team's mature enough and ready enough to handle that based on their training, or they're not.
Totally. That's super interesting. That's probably the best explanation I've heard of it, because I once said something about momentum and an editor was like, I don't believe in that. And ever since that, I've really, I mean, you know, someone who didn't play football or, you know, didn't play sports at that level ever, it's that siloing or that compartmentalization makes so much sense. And I don't think, like, I love how you just put that, because I don't think I've ever heard anyone actually explain it that way. And that's so true. It's like, you have a job, go, you know, to quote a certain football coach, do your job.
And like, listen, there are certain things, like, there are certain moments that definitely help, right? Like, everyone understands, like, hey, if your defense manages to go out and get a turnover there, you recognize, all right, like, sudden change, this is something that you prepare for, but you do have to go out and accomplish it. I won't say you're totally robotic. There is an understanding that when something like that happens, yeah, we got a great opportunity here, but really, it's the same thing that people always talk about. Now, the one thing I will say is real is playing down to your competition because you're playing a lesser team. That stuff, again, on bad teams happens all the time, where the helmet sticker's not nearly as cool. And so you go into that game and you watch a lot of these guys on tape and you're like, all right, they're not that good. And then they're coming to play the Texases, the Alabamas, the Notre Dames of the world, and they give kind of a different level of effort. You get different things. So that stuff gets sort of wild and gets sort of hairy. But again, it's usually, to me, the mark of, you know, immature team versus a veteran team, and kind of how you handle those situations. But
that makes a lot of sense.
So momentum. So you guys were in Austin, then you were in Tennessee, which Tennessee's another very fascinating one. I got to Neyland for the first time last year. One of the most impressive stadium environments I've ever been around. Neyland is one of the coolest places I've ever gotten to call a football game.
Yeah, I 1000% agree. I mean, I think one of the things about this job that is so that sort of surprises me is how, no matter how many games I've been to, no matter how much I know what I'm walking into, the feeling of stepping on a field and of being at the center of the thing that everybody in that state, and sometimes everybody in the college football community, is paying attention to or invested in, is a high, and there is an emotional response, and the stimulation of that moment. I feel like it's so cliche to say that sports feel spiritual or religious, and I don't actually believe that, but I think that the emotional response of being at something that so many other people are at, where it's so loud, where the bass is thumping, the hype videos are going, it's like it plays into every sensory experience, and Neyland does that. One of the best I've ever been to, and there's a spirit about it that I loved. Like, I went, it was checkered Neyland. They had the, people wearing white, people wearing orange. It was the Florida game, so it mattered so much more than anything. And there was still, people were having fun. I think there are places I've been, like, I think the beginning of an A&M game is super intense, but I wouldn't say that the feeling is like everyone's having fun. It's like everyone's there for a reason. And I think in Tennessee, it's like everyone is having the time of their lives, and I love it.
I think that's very different for them from last year to this year too, because in year one for Josh Heupel, I don't know if everyone was ready to let themselves feel like it was possible again. And then Hendon Hooker comes in and what he's meant to that program once he took over last year and kind of steadied it. You're right. And I think by the time you got there for that Florida game is really when people started to, because now Tennessee Bama is coming up this weekend as the recording of this podcast. It's going to be one of the biggest games of the year so far. And there's a legitimate feeling that this Tennessee team, that like people do feel like they can buy in. And I feel like that's the mark of a true fan, where you're always going to be last to market on your own team, because in most cases you've been hurt so much and you know so much that you're not ready to just give that affection back as easily because the pain is real.
That's so true. I mean, the people, when I was there, I asked people, the bit we did was, would you rather beat Florida and lose a national championship, or lose to Florida and win a national championship? And most people said beat Florida. Which is, as an objective observer, you're like, that's an insane answer, because if you even if you lose to Florida but then you win the national championship, you've still got bragging rights over Florida, who did not win the national. But it means so much. And by the time, you're right, by the time I got there, everyone was like, no, this is possible. And I, am very skeptical and had sort of a sinking feeling. I was like, oh my God, these fans believe so much that like Florida's going to destroy them. Like, and nobody knew either. I was like, do you know how many times you've won in the last 17 years or, 16 years? And they were like, oh, like 3 or 4. And I'm like, no,
yeah,
once.
That's it.
Like once. That's bad. And I think Hendon Hooker having that experience, having been in college for 6 years, he has the steadiness that the fan base needs, almost even more than like the other players. Like the fan base needs something to believe in, and they're obsessed with Heupel, and it just felt like everything was coming together and Tennessee was actually able to deliver, and that stadium was just rocking out of control.
I will say, I do believe to an extent, and I want to say it was an NPR Hidden Brain podcast I listened to once about religion, and part of religion is communal activity and crowd behavior. And part of the reason that you see waning religious attendance in certain denominations in modern times is because we've had other entities to replace those things, sports being one of them. And I'm paraphrasing this, and I hope I'm remembering it right, but it made sense in that when you get a stadium environment like that, and so much of it is, hey, we all cheer at the same time. At some places like A&M, we've got set cheers that we all do together. And when you get that going to a certain extent, there is some belief that you can even like have heartbeats actually getting close to sinking in that moment, because it does become so one. And so like,
wow.
Like, I mean, I don't know, community is a very real thing, and its importance to human beings, and what sports does in that avenue is why I always remind people when we talk about NIL, when we talk about all the changes in college football, this isn't a normal place where normal people come to seek a return on investment or coherent behavior. This is where lunatics come, who are armed with wealth that maybe they could never have imagined in their life, to try and affect and support this thing that they care about in a way that borders on God. Like that's a reality in college sports that is terrifying, and also the reason you and I get the microphones and the jobs.
Seriously, I mean, it's like at once horrifying. I mean, I do have these moments sometimes where I'm there and I'm like, oh my God, my job only exists because of how much the people in these stands give a shit about what is happening. And it's also the repetitive nature of it. It's that every Saturday, you know what you're doing, you have a thing to do. Yep. Because I fly in on Wednesdays, I sometimes won't stay the whole game to fly out Saturday night, just because what I'm doing is we're doing all these features and 4 or 5, we'll do 3 or 4 filmed features and then a bunch of social stuff, and so by the time the game starts, it's not actually as crucial to my job. So if you ever have to travel in the South during a college football game. I left Athens. During the second half of the Georgia game. It might as well have been 6 a.m. on a Sunday, because there was absolutely nobody but me on the roads. And it's this feeling of I just kept imagining as I was driving by these houses, I was like, oh my God, everyone has their snacks and like the things they always make, and the people who always come over and they park in the same spot. And then you go to the game and you're like, these people tailgate here, these people tailgate here. Like, it's just such a source of comfort and something to look forward to, and something that you can totally lose yourself in. I did a story on it's not out yet, but should be tomorrow, I think, on the Spike Squad at Georgia.
Yes.
Are you familiar with them? They're these group of kids who you have to audition for it now. There are so many people want to be in it. There are 2 co-presidents. There's this guy Caleb and a girl Jenny, and they are juniors, and they hold interviews, and they interview kids to see if they're worthy. And being worthy means that you get a pair of football pads with spikes glued onto it. And you pick your paint, is what they call it. So you choose a character, and then you dress up as that all year. Like Jenny is Little Red Riding Hood, and she puts prosthetics on her face so it looks like she has a wolf claw across her eye. I mean, it's one of the badass. God. It's like most badass costumes. But something she said to me that I think probably explains college football fandom better than anything I've ever heard is that she was like, I'm a shy person, like I'm quiet by nature, and being in Spike Squad, I just felt like they were able to express themselves and be excited and show emotion without shame. And she was like, and it's made me more confident, and it's made me a better leader. And I was like, oh my God, like this stuff it might be around a football game, but this is someone finding their confidence in who they are and their own voice through a group of people who are all there for this reason that the reason itself doesn't even matter at that point.
Yeah, it is very interesting, and that's like the nature of sports in general, right? It's like finding meaning in a thing that's inherently very meaningless. It should be dumb. It's grown men in costumes, but it's also why I advocate so strongly that the grown men and the grown women at the center of these events get what's coming to them and get the things that they rightly deserve as far as compensation. Because look at how many of the rest of us create meaning based off that. Like, and everywhere you go, you've got some version of the Spike Squad. You've got the paddle people at Oklahoma State. You've got every college, I feel like, has some version of that. Some of them are very cringy, like we've seen at Texas A&M, and the yell leaders at night. My God, I mean, the fact that they willingly consent to that being put online is terrifying and a reminder of what human beings are capable of. But there is a lot of the cool stuff, like you mentioned with the Spike Squad, where you get people that get confidence through this stuff, and that's a pretty cool thing to see, especially up close.
Yeah, I do agree, though, that there is something a little bizarre. Like, I feel sometimes a little bit when I'm walking onto the field and I see the players and like they're sitting on a bench before the game and they're talking to their coaches, and I'm like, oh, okay, so the thing, when you distill down why we're here, it's these people. Yeah. If these people aren't here, this thing doesn't happen. And it's easy to forget that when you zoom out and you're in Athens on a Friday and everyone's going crazy and wearing their Georgia stuff. It's like, it's about Georgia. And it's like, well, Georgia in this case is Georgia football, and Georgia football is made up of 50-some people. And it is a little strange to see that there are humans at the center of it, and they deserve as much as they can possibly get because they're putting their bodies on the line for this thing that we are all making a living and meaning and a sense of self and identity out of. So there are moments where I'm like, this is super weird. But I think that as long as the people at the center of it are there willingly and are getting something out of it, then hopefully that all makes sense.
It's, I think, been part of the reason why we've seen so much change on that front, because at some point the people in the middle looked around and saw the buildings just keep on getting bigger, and they went, oh, okay, maybe us getting a little more is okay. And I think you've seen more of a fan willingness for that than I expected. That's changed probably as much as anything in the decade since I left college and stopped playing, is the attitude towards players getting more in the center of all this, regardless of what the avenue and regardless of what the venue is, whether it's basketball, gymnastics, lacrosse, football, what have you. It's been really interesting to see that response in the middle of this. But
Totally. It's less enjoy your free education, you lucky ducks, and more like, oh, okay. I guess you should have a piece of this pie.
Wait, I do have to ask, because part of it, also you mentioned the people in the middle. There's also part of this, and I could say is at a place that used to pretty much sell out every game where you'd have 82,000 people in the stands. Part of you also does take for granted that, it's just like this all the time everywhere, and that no matter what, we're entitled to these people showing up. And it's not the case, and you go plenty of places where that's not the case, and so seeing that level of devotion is always wild. Talk to me about the squirrel guy that you met at Tennessee. I was so fascinated by this. I texted you when I found out that they were selling shirts in the Tennessee gift shop for this. I need to know everything. How did you meet this man and his famous Tennessee squirrel?
For those of you out there who don't know exactly what Mike texted me, it was I think Friday before the game. I get a text like, Char, I'll Venmo you if you can go get me a shirt with Sinan the squirrel on it from the Tennessee gift shop. And I was like, first of all, Mike, I would get you this as a gift 1,000 times over. Secondly, apparently you can only order it online, so I don't actually know what... This squirrel is the unofficial mascot of Tennessee. And I'm going to be honest, I spent time with the squirrel. I spent time with... Syed, the guy who owns the squirrel, and I still don't fully understand it, because it's sort of like in the Disney movie when, Cinderella or Snow White or whoever it is comes out into the forest and is like surrounded by animals who can speak to her. Like, that's the vibe I got, because squirrels usually don't want to be domesticated and don't hang around, and this squirrel has like attached to this guy who rescued the squirrel, and they just happened to be by the reservoir in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, which is where the Tennessee women's crew team practices, maybe the men's too. And they were sitting there because the squirrel, he'd rescued the squirrel, took it to the UT veterinary hospital, nursed it back to health, tried to let it go 4 times. The squirrel wouldn't go. Syed is from the Middle East. He didn't want to get into his past. He said he came from some bad times and wanted to just make everybody happy. But there was a TV show growing up that he loved about a squirrel, and a cartoon, and the squirrel's name was Sinan. And so he's loved squirrels ever since. So when friends of his found this squirrel, this struggling baby squirrel who was too young to be by itself, they gave it to him, and he took it and since then he's done a 200-hour wildlife certification course so that he can legally keep this squirrel, because it is technically a wild animal. And the crew team, when he was sitting there with it one day, they were like, can you put a vest on him, or like a Tennessee shirt on him? So he made the squirrel a little vest, and then it turned into, they were like, you should bring him to a football game. So he did. He made him a little helmet. Somehow he got really into Harley Davidson, so the squirrel has like 10 tiny motorcycles. He is a camper. I mean, it's so... It was at once so moving. Like the how much this guy loves the squirrel and how much he just wants to make people happy, and is so truly delightful and lovely and sweet. But it's also... I was standing there, and he put the squirrel on my shoulder, and you feel the weight of a squirrel on your shoulder, and I was like, there's a squirrel on my shoulder, it's like... I'm
just thinking in my head of like, I've got the weight of the world on my shoulders. It's like, no, I've got the weight of a squirrel on my shoulders, and somehow that feels as gravitas. It was, but I was like, it's something I've never heard of before. And that the fact that not only did this guy befriend the squirrel and, he became the squirrel's dad, but the squirrel became synonymous with Tennessee football, and people take pictures with the squirrel before games, and the squirrel goes into the stadium, and there's a squirrel in the stadium. It's just wild. Well, I love, if you're a visiting fan heading into Neyland at any point in time, take solace in knowing that among the 100,000 plus people that are there's also a squirrel on that side of that stadium enjoying a football game with you. It truly, Charlotte, and you've gotten to do a lot of cool things, and I've enjoyed seeing so many of them. That one moved me in a way that few other things are going to be able to.
That's so sweet. I mean, that's the goal, right? I think that part of what I love about what I get to do is, and what I try to do is you find these things that are inherently I say absurd, and I mean absurd in the sense of absurdist, like, something outside the realm of what you would ever expect. And I think some people's impulse might be to make fun of it or to be like, look at this weird thing. But what I try to do is always honor that, because nothing at the end of the day is weirder than like painting your face and putting on a jersey of a grown man who's on a football team and then going to watch that grown man play football. Like, if you're a football fan and you're looking down on any of the fan stuff, you're like, oh, that squirrel is weird. It's like, take a long look in the mirror and think about how when a football team lost, it ruined your week. So I think that honoring the people who surround this sport and surround these places and care so much, I think there's nothing I like less than somebody who tells people they're weird for caring about things, or like walks around with a cool jacket on. Like, there's this someone once said to me, they're like, yeah, that guy's just got to take off his cool jacket. And it's like, yeah, just like let things be what they are, and obviously make fun of the stuff that deserves to be made fun of. But if there's a guy out there with a squirrel who's just trying to make people happy, then like, great, let's honor that.
No, I agree. Guy with the cool jacket is the one we can probably make fun of here. Guy with the squirrel on his shoulder, guy that shows up at the Giants game that probably rode the subway all the way to New Jersey with his entire head painted red with that one blue stripe on there. That's a guy that we need to honor, because again, when that game went south, he had to go home maybe to a wife and family, maybe just in a train car full of strangers with that sad pain on his face, because he had made that decision and commitment because he cared that much. And there is part of me, because I cannot personally. Now, there was a time I got pictures of me as a little kid with my chest painted up as like a 12-year-old in the parking lot at Notre Dame Stadium. So I've been there doing it as an adult. You probably would have to pay me if I'm going to paint my head for anything. I think I've set that standard at this point, that if you see me with paint on my head, I'm likely being paid money for that thing. But I admire it because I have not been to that place anymore as a fan.
Same, and I think that's what both, I don't understand it. Like, I report on it, I talk about it, I love it, I respect it. I will never fully understand it. And as someone who had paint on her face and football pads with spikes on them as a part of a video we were making that will come out soon, I was paid to do that.
Which is also one of the coolest parts about this job, is getting to think about the many things that you have actually drawn a paycheck technically for doing.
Yes, but also that I would not have done if I were not being compensated
100%.
for.
100%.
I have a question for you though, Mike. I've never been to Michigan.
Ooh.
And I'm so excited. It's one of the places I've wanted to go most, just because to see a stadium of that size. First of all, what is your relationship to Michigan as a Notre Dame person? Can you objectively think it's cool? And B, what should I do?
So honestly, this is really tough for me to say, because I always said, and part of the reason I love calling college games now is because for so many places, even if I went there as a player, and part of the joy now is I've gotten to go a lot of places that I didn't get to play in towns and cities that were in conferences I never had to interact with. But even going back to the places I did play, and when I went down to Oklahoma this year, it was the first time that it happened. It was the first time in the last 2 years in calling games outside of going down to the Orange Bowl where I played the national title, which is just different because it's more a pro stadium.
Right.
And it's full of memories of sadness and heartbreak. The Oklahoma game was fun because we whooped their ass. But I hadn't gotten to be around outside of that stadium. Going back inside, I had all the flashbacks and was cool, but going around to experiencing the outside, all of that was new. And so it was really fun. Ann Arbor was the same way. I had only ever been to the stadium. I had only ever been inside the Big House, which I will say, one of my things with the Big House, and one of the reasons that stadiums like Death Valley in Baton Rouge or Neyland in Tennessee, is those stadiums are built up and are very sheer. And so you feel very small on the inside. The Big House isn't the same. The Big House because it goes so far back and it's built down. Number one, when you roll up on it, you end up curving around because the stadium's actually built down into the ground a little bit, but also it just goes back. So while it is loud and a sea of maize, which is, and Michigan fans, I know we got a tenuous relationship. The color sucks. Like, you guys all know it deep in your hearts. Maize isn't a good color. I don't have to explain that to you. The reason you guys go with those all blue Jordan uniforms is because deep in places you won't talk about at parties, you know maize as a color sucks. But all that is to say, while I think the stadium doesn't look quite as big as some of its counterparts, still loud, still cool, raucous environment, Ann Arbor is actually a lovely little town. I got to go there for the first time when I was shooting something for a commercial out near Ann Arbor at Eastern Michigan, and I got to stay right in town, and I went and walked around, and at one point I texted my family, I was like, son of a bitch, Ann Arbor is cute as all hell. It's got a lovely little downtown square. It's incredibly charming. You have to go, so there's going to be a lot of split things that tell you. I hunt down basically every place I go. I look for dinner and drinks, ice cream and donuts. And this trip was quick, and so I only got to go for ice cream there. Washtenaw Dairy, to me, was the spot I was told to go. It is lovely. It has a beautiful combination of wonderful, very original, fun ice cream, donuts that are also for sale there, and you can buy firewood there, which feels very deeply, truly Midwestern in a way that I appreciate. So I have nothing but good things to say, actually, about the town of Ann Arbor, which pains me deeply.
No, I can imagine, but that's what everybody keeps saying. I think we might have to do a food tour as one of the videos, because the only thing I'm like, what should I do in Michigan? You know, in Tennessee, it's like, you got to check out Vol Navy. You know, in Athens, it's like Spike Squad, it's UGA. In Michigan, everyone's like Zingerman's, Pizza House, the dairy. So, you know,
Zingerman's does live up to the hype also, I will say. There's also, and this is just a side note because I feel like you may enjoy it, across the street from Zingerman's, there's a lovely little card shop that also sells the supplies for people that make those fairy gardens out in front of their house. And I only know that because my brother's mother-in-law.
You have a fairy garden.
I wish, and one day, maybe.
I know. I like expect you to, and I mean that as a highest compliment.
My brother's mother-in-law, so my sister-in-law's mom, has a fairy garden in the front of her house, and so when I saw that, I went in there and decided to endear myself to her forever by buying fairy garden supplies.
That's incredible.
But lovely little store there.
Yes.
Zingerman's kicks ass, but yes, it is eating your way through Ann Arbor. The Midwest, we don't have as much of the like bells and whistles around some of the tailgate environments as they do in the South. The one thing that I have found pretty consistently, and I'm sure, I don't know if you feel the same way, the SEC tailgate scene is just a different animal altogether.
Yes. Oh, 1,000. And I think part of the reason I'm so excited to go to Michigan is, first of all, I know a lot of people who went there, and it feels sort of like the closest thing to, if college football were a big deal in New England, what it would be like. I also think that there are so many people from New England I know who went to Michigan. So like that, I think what I'm trying to say is that I think I'm going to feel the most at home there. The fact that, you know, they have a Jewish deli there, and I was at a football game in the high holidays feeling super guilty and looking around and being like, I think I might be the only person in this situation right now. I don't think there are many of me in Tennessee. But, you know, that to me, I think I'm excited because I'm like, oh, we'll have a pastrami sandwich, and you know it'll feel
I
right
love
home.
Michigan football, deeply Northeastern values.
Tell me I'm wrong. Like, all the people, I hope people I know who went to Michigan are listening to this and can try to tell me I'm wrong, because I see all of you and you're all from 20 minutes outside of Boston.
Don't think we don't notice, all right?
Yeah, we know.
You might not know, but we know about you. And anyone listening to this podcast, if you are from around Ann Arbor, I'm sure we've got some Midwestern listeners. Hit Charlotte up. Let her know where all the good spots in Ann Arbor are. Take care of our friend here as she gets ready to go and embrace your city. I will stop talking shit about Mays long enough to ensure that Charlotte Wilder has a good time out there. So, Charlotte, we appreciate you taking time out of your schedule. So fun to catch up with you. I hope the trip to Ann Arbor is good, even if I can't say a lot of good things about the football team there. So you enjoy that. Thank you so much, friend. We'll talk to you again soon.
Always a pleasure, Mike. Good luck this weekend. Well, I guess it's, here's the last thing I'll say. When you work in or around or based on college football, it feels like it's always almost the weekend.
Yeah. Oh,
I'm like, good luck tomorrow. And you're like, well, Saturday's 5 days away. And I'm like, no, but like work-wise, it's
Friday's
already the
travel
weekend.
day. I mean, at least for me, your travel day's much earlier in the week. You're doing all the build-up there. Every day's game day during football season. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise.
You said it.
All right, Brandon, Big Fat Football Tuesday around here. Obviously, great to catch up with Charlotte on her season. We'll get even more college football as the week goes along. My dad's hanging around here in the house for the week. We'll probably talk to him, get to break down plenty of that. But in the meantime, since you're the man with the vest, I have to.
Lines in hysteria. It's like the darkness is the light. This, that, the third. Am I scaring you tonight? This, that, the third. Ain't used to what you like. This, that, the third. This, that, the third. Bum, bum, be dum, bum, bum, ba dum, dum. Bum, bum, be dum, bum, bum, ba dum, this, that, the third.
Brandon Newman's audition for the Super Bowl halftime show. Ladies and gentlemen, Rihanna's Disturbia rightly making the list of Halloween spooky themed this, that, and the third songs.
Okay.
Yeah, listen, pulled it off, Brandon. I know you were nervous. You were practicing a lot of that before the show here, pacing, tossing, and turning. I think you pulled it off.
Thank you. You get these suggestions for these spooky songs, and you're like, oh, yeah, I can see the vibe. But then you hear the music, you're like, okay, it's a little spooky. Then you see the music video, and it's like, oh, those are Halloween costumes. Okay, I'm where I'm supposed to be.
It's like Die Hard taking place during Christmas and thus being a Christmas movie. It makes perfect sense.
Yes. Exactly. It's a Christmas party.
It's always a party here. Download, subscribe, rate, and review GoJo. Leave us a 5-star rating and a review. Tell Brandon what a great job he did with this, that, and the third. And at GoJo Show on Twitter, you can also offer up suggestions, as October is a spooky-themed month for this, and we need all the help we can get finding those spooky-themed songs here. And Brandon, very, very spooky for this. The Panthers fire head coach Matt Rhule and defensive coordinator Phil Snow after the team's 37-15 loss to the San Francisco 49ers, 1-4 to start the season. This has been a struggle every which way. We talked about this yesterday on the podcast and said this was broken. It was over. You got Baker Mayfield, who's banged up and now going to be out for a number of weeks. Wasn't surprised by this, Brandon, but according to Adam Schefter, always reminded that these coaches are built different, because Panthers former head coach Matt Rhule is going to leave being owed north of $40 million. He signed one of those Brian Flores longer-term deals. We had heard from their owner, David Tepper, who was not going to wait around very long for this to happen. A hyper-aggressive guy say he thought it was going to take some time to build a competent organization. Apparently not time he was willing to wait. So that means he gets to write the big fat paycheck to Matt Rhule, who, again, owed north of $40 million. Now, he is a guy that was a successful college head coach at Baylor and Temple. Most people assume will get another job in college football. Whether or not you think what he's done is actually transferable and that'll be a good hire for your school, he'll probably have another job offered to him. He'll probably take that job. And there's a number that are open right now between Nebraska, Wisconsin, Georgia Tech, some of the others that are out there. And whatever contract he signs will offset some of the money that the Panthers owe him. That's how these things tend to work. Brandon, I am amazed because, man, if you told me, hey, you got $40 million for going out here and not doing your job anymore, I promise I'd be the best at not doing my job. I'd be so great at not doing my job or any job, and you would just have to sit there and pay me every red cent of that money for me to just sit on my ass and not do a damn thing. And that's why it's a reminder, coaches are built different. These lunatics crave having the clicker in their hand and having their feet on the grass in a way that is unhealthy, but in a way that ultimately makes them fit to do a job that requires you to be a little insane.
A job that requires you to be a little insane, yes, and also offers some type of life insurance with these long extension deals. Obviously, our coach, Charlie Weiss, the guy that got both of us to Notre Dame, got bought out and let us know that he got some money every December for the next few years, and he and his wife would cheers to that moment and that check. So, yes, good for Matt Rhule. I'm hoping that he tears college up. I'm more focused on Steve Wilkes in this situation, Mike, because he had a rough go with the Josh Rosen, Sam Bradford, Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah, he was a one and done coach at the head coach for the Cardinals. He was the passing game coordinator on defense, the pass defense coordinator for Phil Snow's outfit. Who, by the way, Phil Snow is going to be a coach that lands on his feet somewhere because that defense was out here balling. I'm a little surprised he wasn't kept around in the building, but that's neither here nor there. Yes, I'd agree. Steve Wilkes hopefully has a good experience with this. There were certainly things about his tenure in Arizona he did wrong, but we know the plight of minority coaches in this league, and so every opportunity like this it feels big, and you're hopeful he's able to make the most out of this, even with a team that just roster-wise is going to struggle for a little bit right now.
Right.
Brandon, let's get to that. That is Bronny James Jr. going out here and getting this bread. Bronny finalized an NIL endorsement deal with Nike, along with 4 other of the top 5 amateur basketball players out there. The deal includes Bronny James Jr., Iowa point guard Caitlin Clark, Stanford guard Haley Jones, Sierra Canyon High School star Juju Watkins, and the top 2023 point guard DJ Wagner of Camden, New Jersey. Obviously, LeBron's dad, or Bronny's dad, has the lifetime Nike deal, all that stuff there. It sounds like he'll be a part of the rollout for the newest LeBron 20 shoe. But, Brandon, this is the stuff that felt inevitable. This is the part that we always have to remember, too. High school kids can get broke off with this NIL stuff now, and I always feel like that was going to be more relevant to high school basketball players than it was the very few Quinn Ewers-esque high school football players that we saw have that effect. For anyone that forgets, Texas's current quarterback, Quinn Ewers, was a high school senior in Texas where they would not allow high school athletes to earn NIL money. And so he reclassified as the class up, got to enroll at Ohio State going into that fall, sat there for the year, and then transferred to Texas. And so this rule not affecting LeBron James Jr. because he's in California. And also, basketball is just a sport where we see talented players identified sooner as people tracking towards NBA stardom.
Yeah, he's in that new LeBron 20s commercial that I think LeBron put on Instagram. So like they're hanging out in the backyard. He jumps in the bottom of the pool, jumps out of the pool clean in the LeBron 20s, and Bronny James is sitting there with his friends like, "Wow, Dad, didn't know you could do that." So yes, he's already getting the bread, but it's interesting the concept that Nike's been a part of Bronny's family for a very long time in a way I don't really know many people can kind of really tap into. But it also feels like it's a tale that he's going to end up playing his college basketball in Oregon.
Yeah, I know a lot of people have thought about that. This is, I think, interesting on that front because for so long, as we went through those NCAA probes, a lot of people rightly pointed out that the underbelly of college basketball is largely driven by sneaker companies and the money and influence that they have on so many of these decisions. I do wonder now that this can be done above the table, because the other people they mentioned there, big-time college stars, Caitlin Clark's one of the biggest stars in college basketball, period. Forget a men's or women's distinction. She's a baller. But you can do all this stuff now above the table without having to have it be those under-the-table payments that usually influence these outcomes. I wonder if that changes it now that if you're Nike, you can just go and be affiliated with this player. You don't have to be affiliated with that player through their institution the way that you used to have to do that in order to find a workaround for the system that existed in the old NCAA. So something to monitor here for a lot of these guys that might not even have to worry about college much longer because one and done doesn't seem like it's long for this world. But Brandon, let's get to the third, because the third is something we promised yesterday and didn't deliver on. You rightly called an audible, and now we have to address the scandal in Fat Bear Week. For anyone that missed it, we talked about this last week on the podcast. There is a national park in Alaska. That every year hosts Fat Bear Week, which is a competition to determine the biggest, fattest, juiciest bear in their parks and who the winner might be. We went through last week and gave the NFL comps for every team. Bears like 32 Chunk that were representing the Philadelphia Eagles, Otis, the Buccaneers, 747, the Chiefs, 856, the Buffalo Bills. All of these, the numbers and essentially call signs for these big, fat, juicy bears. And we apparently found out over the course of the voting where, Brandon, you and I chose bears. I chose 747, who was the bear that most closely identifies the Chiefs. You chose 856, the Bills. I beat you in the first round on October 5th, fair and square. But as we got to the first semifinal round, 435 Holly, who was a former champion and a bear that most closely mimicked the New England Patriots. This is where it gets interesting, Brandon, and this is why I brought up these comps, because when you hear this, you won't be surprised at what ended up happening. Because Fat Bear Week had a controversy. Someone had stuffed the ballot box and tried to affect the outcome of voting. And they had to retally the votes, and wouldn't you know it, 747 ended up beating 435 Holly by about 7,000 votes. And Brandon, we had a cheating scandal in Fat Bear Week involving the
They
team
put the weights
that
in the
we
bear?
I'm not sure what they did as far as the weights in the bear. No, someone basically bought stuff to the ballot box on the website where you can vote for these things. But Brandon, we have a cheating scandal involving the bear that we said most closely identifies with the New England Patriots. That comp couldn't have been any more perfect.
I'm pissed, Mike. When we broke it down and spent that time, I was nervous about the power that we were putting in the ether, connecting these Bears to these NFL teams, because it felt so. It was a great recap. It's on Friday's episode, this, that, and the third. I actually go listen to it, very back half of the episode. It was the third actually on Friday. I listen. Spend the 20 minutes. No,
it's worth it.
It's. I'm disappointed in the Tom Brady Bears.
It's a damn shame, Brandon, and I think it's a reminder that, one, there are very few things I'm equipped to do and judge quite like food contests and arbitrary things about bears being thick. One, nailed that one. And two, there is just no surer force in the universe than the Patriots being involved in controversy, whether that is in the NFL or whether that is in Fat Bear Week. So continued success and blessings to my Bear 747 and his romp to hopefully the top of Fat Bear Week. We'll get you the final results of that when we have got them. We hope you have enjoyed this podcast as much as we enjoy Fat Bear Week. If you did, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, and review GoJo wherever you get your podcast. Leave us a 5-star rating and a review. Feel free to stuff the ballot box here. If you want to use a bot army to give us a bunch of positive 5-star reviews and ratings, who are we to stop you from doing that? Who are we to stop you from going to subscribe to the DraftKings YouTube channel and then to go and check out the GoJo of Mike Golick Jr. Play Us? Can't stop you from doing it. Would love you if you did. Thanks so much, everybody. Don't stuff the ballot box for other voting here. Do that the right way. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you tomorrow.